welcome to my channel. In the jungles of Borneo, a forgotten sniper hidden behind a non-essential desk is forced to make a choice: follow orders or save lives. When a Navy SEAL team is ambushed and left for dead, Ava Rourke breaks protocol and returns to the shadows she once swore to leave behind. What follows is a fight no one expected, and a legend reborn from the ridge. You ever sit at the edge of a fight, watching lives hang by a thread, knowing every instinct in your body is screaming to move, yet you're stuck behind a desk labeled non-essential? That was me. Officially, I was Ava Rourke, 33, stationed at Forward Base Indira, deep in the Borneo Highlands. Role: Comms Support Specialist. In other words, a technician with background clearance and no active combat designation. But that wasn't always true. The night the storm rolled in, thick mist curled through the jungle, and even the moon refused to show itself. SEAL Unit Bravo was out on a recon op in Grid 11 Charlie, supposed to be a quiet pass-through. It turned into a kill box. Ambushed. Encircled. Ammo dwindling. Radio calls sharp with panic. Base, this is Bravo 3. Anyone read? We're boxed in. Can't hold much longer. I wasn't scheduled to be on at that hour, but something made me stay late in the comms tent. Maybe it was restlessness. Maybe it was that damn scope I'd been cleaning again, like a habit I couldn't let die. When I heard the distress call, I instinctively reached for the volume knob and turned it up. And then I heard it. The edge in their voice. Not fear. Something worse. Acceptance. 3 years ago, I would have been on that ridge already. My rifle would have been humming against my cheek, breath slowing, body still. Back then, I was Specialist Rourke, long-range overwatch for the 75th Recon Wing. Precision shooter. For confirmed saves from distances so far they stopped giving medals and started labeling me classified asset. But I stepped away. Not because I couldn't handle it. Because one night in the Tangi Valley, I made the right shots, but not all of them in time. I walked away from the field, from the trigger, from the whispers of ghost shooter. Said I needed clarity. Peace. Whatever word people use when they're running from the things only they remember. Now, at Indira, my name wasn't on mission rosters. Just Rourke, Signal Control Tier 2. Most of the new guys thought I was just the quiet tech in the back, never raised my voice, never asked for briefing time. Some even laughed behind my back. Heard she used to be something. Probably couldn't shoot a watermelon off a fence now. I didn't care what they said. But that night, that transmission, it unlocked something. I stood in the gear tent surrounded by half-packed crates and old weapon racks. My hand moved to the case that hadn't been opened in over 2 years. Inside, my old friend waited. M98B. Custom grip. Bolt smooth as silk. She still smelled like solvent and gun oil. The smell of decisions. I knew grabbing it was against protocol. My current orders were clear, non-combat role. But the storm grounded air support. Ground QRF was 50 minutes out. And Bravo? They had maybe 20. Someone had to decide what mattered more, rules or lives. So I made the call. I slung the rifle across my back and slipped out through the south clearing, past sentries too distracted by rain and alerts to question one more shadow in the dark. Each step into that jungle wasn't just a break in protocol. It was a return. A quiet reckoning. They didn't know who was coming for them. But they would. I moved through the jungle like I'd never left it. The undergrowth clawed at my boots. Vines pulled like hands begging me to turn back. But I knew this place. Terrain doesn't forget who's walked it before. You just have to listen. The rhythm of the forest. The tempo of branches under tension. The crunch of rotting leaves that tell you where not to step. My destination was the northern ridge overlooking Grid 11 Charlie. 2 clicks uphill through mist and mud. A hell climb. But from there, I could see every fire lane, every approach vector, and most importantly, every shooter pinning Bravo in. Back at base, I was invisible. Out here, the jungle saw me again. The rain kept falling in sheets, muting my movement. I thanked it. Visibility was terrible, but it was terrible for everyone. And unlike the men hunting Bravo, I wasn't trying to get into the kill zone. I was aiming for the one spot their Overwatch had ruled out as too steep to matter. Just like the Tangi Cliffs. Just like then. Halfway up the ridge, my thighs burned, lungs screaming for more air than I had to give. I pressed through. If your soul remembers how to take lives to save them, your body remembers how to move. even when it hurts. Finally, the tree lean thinned, and I reached the shelf. I dropped to my stomach, elbows digging into the wet soil, scope clicking into place. I breathed in and let the old rhythm settle. Heart, scope, wind, fire. Down in the valley, flashes lit up the trees, muzzle bursts, tight formations. Bravo was pinned against a shallow ravine, 3 positions pressing them inward from the north, east, and south. Perfect triangle of death. But I had the angle, high enough to see behind the line, high enough to pick the spine out of this attack. I scanned quickly, found their squad leader, a shadow just behind a thick banyan trunk, giving orders via hand signals. His posture said he didn't even consider the possibility of incoming fire from above. Arrogant. Typical. I dialed in wind, 1. 2 meters left drift, 715 meters downslope. Breath in. Exhale. Trigger brake. Crack. He folded like paper. 1 down. The head. The others blinked, confused. It was like cutting power to a puppet. Coordination faltered. Bravo, still unaware of me, suddenly found pressure lessening. Then a machine gun burst lit up the south edge. I adjusted, suppressing fire, keeping them from repositioning. That gun had to go. Target at 890 meters. Shifting winds. 3 cycles. Learn the pattern. On the 4th burst, I fired. His weapon stuttered and stopped. So did he. Bravo moved instantly. Whoever was leading them now recognized the shift. They fell back in pairs, regrouping under better cover. Their voice came over the comms. Unknown support, we see your fire. Can you ID? I keep my mic low and steady. Overwatch established. Keep low. Focus fire northeast. You've got an opening. Silence. Then, copy, Overwatch. Moving. I didn't give them a name. Didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. Back to scope. A runner broke from the tree line. Flanker, trying to reposition for a rear ambush. I tracked him through 4 trees. Saw the pattern. Waited for the silhouette to break clean. Crack. He dropped mid-stride. Mud catching his weight like the earth had opened up. I moved mechanically now. Adjust. Fire. Reload. Track. I wasn't a person anymore. I was the ridge. The wind. The line between their survival and death. 2 more down. 1 to wound. 1 to scare. Break their morale. Then something flickered in my peripheral. Movement. Close. Too close. They triangulated my fire and were coming. I didn't run. I slung the rifle, drew my sidearm and knife, and melted into the brush. Let them come. I slid into the undergrowth, the jungle closing around me like a welcome cloak. It wasn't fear that moved me. It was familiarity. I knew this dance. I'd done it before. They were too. One heavier-footed, stepping through wet foliage like he owned the terrain. The other smart, staggered steps, using cover, flanking wide. He was the threat. I stayed low, heartbeat quiet, counting the rhythm of their movement. 30 seconds, maybe less, and they'd sweep the rock face I'd just fired from. They'd expect a sniper to reposition horizontally. Most do. But I learned long ago, don't move away, move beneath. I dropped into a shallow depression in the ground I'd noticed earlier, buried under a tangle of roots and stone. I'd marked it as an emergency fallback as I climbed. One of the habits that never left. 20 seconds later, the first one appeared. He had the bearing of someone expecting a trophy kill. Wrong ridge, wrong day. When he turned to gesture to his partner, I rose from the earth like a bad memory and dropped him with a quick thrust under the ribs. Silent, clean. I didn't have time to drag the body. His partner was close. I could hear it in the shift of leaves and the stop-go of trained footsteps. I waited. The flanker moved in, saw his man down, but didn't freeze. Smart. He swung his rifle toward me with practiced speed. But I was already behind a root bulge. His first shot hit air and bark. I used the second between his shots to close the distance. He realized too late I wasn't just hiding. I was hunting. We collided, and his rifle tangled in the vines. My forearm caught his throat. My knife finished the rest. No sound, just a spasm, and then stillness. 2 minutes later, I was back on my perch, rifle steady, heartbeat level. Bravo's perimeter was holding now. No longer panicking. They'd seen enough combat to know when the tide shifted, and someone unseen was watching their 6. Another call came over the radio. Overwatch, you still with us? I thumbed the mic. Still here. 2 hostiles down your flank neutralized. Perimeter clear for the moment. The reply came quickly this time. Who the hell are you? I didn't answer. Some questions don't need a reply when the math speaks louder. The lull was brief. I spotted movement on the northern tree line, 24 meters deeper than before. A second wave. New enemy squad. They'd sent in a sweep team to check on the first group, and now they were hesitating, confused by what they didn't expect. That was my edge. Confusion creates gaps. Gaps let you choose who walks out. I adjusted the scope, found the lead element again. Narrow angle, but clear. The wind was settling. Crack. He fell, and the squad fell apart with him. Bravo moved like wolves now, working angles, covering each other, pushing out rather than just surviving. Their leader keyed in again. Overwatch, can you give us 2 more minutes of cover? I smiled slightly. Try 3. Then I went to work. The clock was ticking, but now it was ticking for the enemy. What had started as a methodical ambush was dissolving into chaos. Without leadership and with key fire lanes compromised, the attacking force splintered, desperate to regain initiative, unsure if they were being targeted by one shooter or a full squad. That uncertainty was my advantage. I fed it like fire. I tracked a radio operator trying to regroup the remaining hostiles. His comms pack had a slight shine to it even in the low light. Probably didn't think he'd need camo paint where they had total control. Wrong again. Crack. Comms down. Now they couldn't even scream for help. Down in the valley, Bravo started moving like they meant it. They'd pulled one casualty to safety, dragging him through the brush, while others laid down coordinated fire. It was beautiful to watch, a kind of chaos that only looked random to the untrained eye. To me, it was rhythm. I covered their path with suppressive shots, not always to kill, but to control, letting the enemy know that every open movement was a gamble. They didn't know where I was, and it showed in how erratically they repositioned, ducked, hesitated. Then I saw it. One last enemy push. 5 fighters flanking from the east, low, fast, trying to reach a spot where Bravo's coverage had thinned. A last desperate play. If they reached that rise, they'd have a firing angle on the team's exposed rear. I didn't think. I acted. The first shot dropped the point man mid-sprint. The second clipped the lead's shoulder. He twisted, stumbled, fell. Third, a clean chest shot. Fourth, deliberate miss to scatter the last 2. They froze. That was enough. Bravo's second fire team turned just in time, caught them in a cross-angle sweep. Done. 27 minutes. That's how long it had been since the first call for help. No air support. No reinforcements. Just one woman on a forgotten ridge with a rifle they said was too old, in a role they said she no longer belonged in. Bravo, this is Overwatch, I said calmly into the radio. Area clear. You're good to exfil. The reply was quick. Copy. Goddamn, who are you? But the voice had changed this time. Not suspicion. Respect. The kind that's earned, not issued. I didn't answer. I was already packing up. Bolt open. Chamber clear. Scope off. Every motion practiced. Silent. As if I'd never been there. But the silence that followed, that was mine. The way down was slower. Not because of the incline. It was steeper going up, but because every step now carried the weight of silence. The kind that settles after adrenaline bleeds out of your system and leaves something heavier in its place. I moved with care, tracing back my own path through the jungle. Even ghosts have to cover their tracks. Especially ghosts. Bravo had made it out. I tracked their exfil signal until it went cold, standard when the evac birds went airborne. They'd live. Maybe all of them. And if not all, most. Which was more than what had been waiting for them before I moved. I reached the tree line outside Indira just as the storm began to fade. The rain shifted from hard and punishing to soft and apologetic. I ducked behind the northern checkpoint, timing it with the perimeter shift change, same as I had planned. Nobody noticed me. Or if they did, they didn't want to. Back inside the gear tent, I cleaned everything. Rifle, gear, scope, down to the latches on my case. Precision wasn't about show. It was about respect, for the weapon, the act, and the responsibility of it all. I returned the M98B to its locked case and placed it exactly where it had been. Untouched, according to the paperwork. Which, if anyone asked, it was. Then I sat at my terminal in comms support, pulled up routine maintenance logs, and resumed my role as the invisible technician. 40 minutes later, Bravo's comms crackled back online. Base, this is Bravo Actual. Exfil complete. For wounded, none critical. Request debrief, slot within the hour. Also, A pause, followed by a new voice. Female, steady. We need to know who provided Overwatch. They saved our asses out there. We owe them our lives. Nobody in the ops center had an answer. They scanned for backup deployment logs. Found none. A ghost, they started saying. Some whispered story from old Spec Ops briefings. A sniper who'd gone off-roster years ago and still haunted ridges when it mattered most. I heard it all, but I didn't say a word. By morning, the base was buzzing. Debrief logs from Bravo poured in. Details sharp, voices steady, but laced with a confusion that kept returning to one point. The ridge. The shots. The timing. The fact that no sniper was logged in theater. No assets. No orders. And yet, someone had been there. Captain Elena Vasquez, Bravo's commanding officer, filed her report in person. She had the kind of presence that filled a room without trying. Sharp eyes, dark hair tucked under regulation, and a tone that didn't ask questions unless she already had half the answers. She came into the comms room around 0900. I was at my desk, eyes on the screen, fingers moving through system diagnostics like it was just another Tuesday. She scanned the room slowly, then nodded once to the lead comms officer. "I'd like to speak to Ava Rourke," she said, calm as stone. Heads turned. Someone gestured toward me. I stood slowly, careful not to look surprised. "Ma'am." She motioned for me to follow. We walked in silence to the small side room usually used for comm audits. She closed the door behind us, then turned and looked at me for a long time. "Your name came up," she said finally. "In what context, ma'am?" Her eyes narrowed. In the kind where someone's group walks out of an ambush because they weren't alone. And when the reports come in, nobody fits the profile. Except maybe someone who knows the terrain, knows the rifle, and knows exactly where to be. I kept my face unreadable. She walked closer. "You didn't check out a weapon. No log deployment. But the shots we heard, those weren't luck. That was experience. That was hours and years behind glass." Still, I didn't speak. Finally, she placed something on the table. A shell casing. Match grade. Custom load. The kind only someone with direct access and deep history would use. The kind I'd once spent hours tuning back when I was more than just background noise. This was found at a ridge top, Vasquez said. One our intel said was inaccessible. Whoever was up there knew exactly how to bend wind and gravity into cooperation. She leaned forward. "Was that you, Rourke?" I met her eyes. What would it change if it was? She studied me. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. We stood there in silence, two soldiers separated by time, rank, and the kind of understanding that doesn't need explanation. Finally, she said, "There's going to be a review. Someone at command wants to know how that team survived. But I'm not interested in blowing smoke. I'm interested in results." I nodded once. "Then you've got them." She smiled faintly. "You ever think about going active again?" I didn't answer right away, but I knew the answer was already forming. The review came 2 days later. Not a formal reprimand, not even a clear inquiry, just a classified debriefing that made the rounds at higher echelons and never made it to paper. The kind that started with quiet nods and ended with quiet decisions. I stayed off the roster. On paper, nothing had changed, but things shifted in ways you could feel. The way some of the younger operators nodded when I passed. The way logistics personnel stopped calling me tech and started using specialist again, whether my badge said it or not. No one said it outright, but everyone had their guesses. Rumors spread fast in the quiet. By the end of the week, Captain Vasquez returned. This time not to confront me, but to hand me a sealed envelope. Inside, a simple statement. Authorization approved. Advanced combat certification reactivated. I stared at it for a long time. 3 years. That's how long I'd been sidelined. Voluntarily at first, then administratively. People said it was to preserve my mental bandwidth. Truth was, they didn't know what to do with someone who'd survived too much and talked too little. But now someone up top had made a different call. "You don't have to accept it," Vasquez said. "But I think you already did the night you walked into that jungle." She wasn't wrong. Still, I didn't reply. Just folded the paper back into the envelope and slid it into the breast pocket of my uniform. I didn't need medals, praise, or rank. I needed readiness. I needed to know I hadn't let the best parts of myself atrophy while I buried them under maintenance reports. That night, I took the M98B to the range. The range master raised an eyebrow. "You reactivated?" I nodded once. He opened the gate without another word. It was nearly sunset, the jungle shadows long across the steel silhouettes. I lay prone, rifle nestled against my shoulder, the weight of it grounding me like it always had. I breathed. I fired. 10 shots. 10 hits. Varying range. Adjusting for wind that barely whispered. I didn't miss. When I stood, a few of the operators training nearby looked over, their talk quieter now. One of them, a kid I'd overheard joking about me a week earlier, gave a single slow nod. Not of apology, of recognition. A week passed. My name started appearing again, quietly, tucked into the lower corner of mission briefings. First as an advisor, then as an optional Overwatch element. Finally, just as Rourke, designated marksman. No fanfare, no speech. That's how it should be. I kept my mouth shut in meetings, but the questions started coming my way. Younger troops asked about gear setups, fire discipline, wind call techniques. Some were subtle, like they didn't want to admit they were asking the ghost on base for advice. Others just pulled up a chair. One of them, Corporal Jules Renner, had barely seen a year in. He came to me with a busted scope mount and a dozen questions. We sat for an hour going over reticle drift and parallax errors. When we finished, he said, "They used to say you were just old inventory. No offense." "None taken," I told him. "It's easy to underestimate what you don't understand." He gave a sheepish grin. "Not anymore." But it wasn't all nods and quiet compliments. Some people still looked at me like a relic. Someone with ghosts too close behind her to trust fully in front. I didn't blame them. People don't fear age. They fear what age might remember. At night, I'd lie in the rack and stare at the canvas above me, letting the jungle hum outside fill the space between thoughts. I remembered every mission I couldn't talk about. Every shot I'd taken that didn't come with a parade, only paperwork. You never forget the moment the crosshairs settle and you realize, this isn't just about aim. It's about choice. The hardest part isn't pulling the trigger, it's living with the ones you didn't. I'd carried that weight for years. Thought I could leave it behind by stepping out of the fight. But I learned something in those minutes on the ridge. You don't outrun what you're made for. You just delay the moment it finds you again. Some of us are wired to see what others miss. To hear the shift in wind before the shot. To feel the difference between hesitation and action. And some of us don't get to retire. We just fade into the background until something pulls us back into focus. The orders came quietly. No formal memo, no big announcement. Just a line in the morning brief. Overwatch recon detail, Alpha, 2 grid, ridge support, Rourke. There it was. No asterisk. No note about advisory status. Just my name, like it had never left. That afternoon, I sat through the mission planning session with Lieutenant Kessler and his team. They were young, sharp, full of questions, but this time, none were directed at me with skepticism. Only curiosity. Respect. I laid out sightlines based on terrain I knew too well. Recommended approach angles. Extraction fallback options. The room listened. After the briefing, Kessler caught up with me near the gear lockers. He hesitated a second, then said, "Word is, you're the one who saved Bravo." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what they're saying?" He nodded. "Doesn't matter to me. What matters is I want you on that ridge again." I didn't answer, just nodded and went back to checking gear. Later, Sergeant Nia Torres approached me during weapons maintenance. She was one of the loudest doubters before. This time, she looked different, like someone who had watched a storm roll in and realized she'd underestimated the wind. "I was wrong," she said simply. I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. "You weren't the only one," I replied. "I just figured someone off the roster was out for a reason." "There was a reason," I said. "But sometimes reasons change." She nodded. "Glad you're back." Back. It didn't feel like I had returned. More like I had been holding my breath all these years, and only now remembered how to exhale. I still didn't know what the future looked like. Maybe I'd be reactivated fully. Maybe not. But I knew this. When the next ridge needed a guardian, I'd be there. No fanfare. No flag waving. Just the silence that comes before the shot, and the knowledge that some people don't need recognition to matter. The sun dipped low over the valley that evening, casting long shadows over the range. I stood alone, rifle broken down before me. Each part laid out with the same care I'd practiced since I first learned what precision really meant. Not just in shooting. In judgment. In presence. In knowing when to step forward and when to disappear. The brass from my last few practice rounds lay cooling on the concrete beside me. In the distance, Jungle birds sang into the dusk, and for a moment, it felt like peace. But peace was never the point. Readiness was. I thought of the younger soldiers, faces I didn't know last month now nodding to me in passing, asking questions, watching my hands as I adjusted optics or measured barrel tension. They were hungry, not just for action, but for clarity, for someone who had walked through fire and didn't need to brag about the burns. I could give them that, not with stories, not with speeches, with presence. So I stayed, trained, spoke when it mattered, taught when I could, because one day, one of them will find themselves where I once stood, alone, listening to screams over comms, knowing no one is coming unless they go. They'll have to decide what matters more, orders or lives. And when they do, I hope they remember the woman who wasn't on the roster, but showed up anyway. They won't know everything. They don't need to. Some of us operate better in the dark, not for mystery's sake, but because the dark is where people need you the most, where rules blur and choices carry weight beyond citations or commendations. Out there, in the places where extraction is uncertain and minutes bleed like years, it's not about who you were. It's about who you are when the call comes through. That night, I packed the rifle one last time. Cleaned, oiled, stored. I would take it out again soon. Not because I had to, but because now, I was part of something again. Not a legend, not a ghost, just someone watching from the ridge. And when the next flare goes up in the mist, when the next voice on the comms says, "We can't hold much longer," I'll be ready. Because some of us don't need a reason to show up. We just do.